My name is Rebecca Moore, and at 34 I own a beauty salon in San Francisco that I built with my own two hands. But 25 years ago, I was just a 9-year-old girl watching my family splinter into pieces. My father took my brother, my mother took my sister, and nobody took me. After 2 decades of silence, they all suddenly want back into my life, expecting the same desperate child they abandoned. But that little girl is gone. In her place stands a woman who built herself from the ground up. Before I tell you how it all happened, write your country in the comments. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe, because what I'm about to share will change the way you see family forever. Before everything fell apart, we were what most people would consider a normal family. We lived in a small Iowa town in an old house by the railroad. At night the trains rattled the glass like a pocketful of coins, and I learned to sleep in brief, quiet spaces between freights. In winter, Dad taped plastic over the frames to keep the draft out. In summer, the smell of creosote floated through the screens and settled on the curtains. If I close my eyes, I can still feel the way the mattress hummed, a soft vibration that felt like a giant's slow heartbeat under the floor. My father, David, was a surgeon who matched his wristwatch to hospital shifts and walked with the tired straightness of a man who carried other people's emergencies on his back. He always smelled faintly of antiseptic and mint candies, the green kind he kept in the glove box of the old Jeep. He'd drop one into his mouth as he backed down the driveway before dawn, stethoscope coiled like a question mark in his coat pocket. When he came home, scrub cap hair matted, he placed his pager on the counter like a grenade he hoped wouldn't go off. He didn't talk much about the hospital, only left small traces, a notebook with block letters, a folded anatomy diagram used as a coaster, a habit of washing his hands twice before he sat down. My mother, Laura, wrote code at a particle board desk pushed against the living room wall. The glow of her laptop was the house's second moon. She worked in the evenings with a mug that held more coffee than comfort, and sometimes she slept right there, forehead on her forearm, a strand of hair trapped under the trackpad. I remember the clicking soft at first, then fast and frustrated, then still. When the rest of us ate dinner, she would nod along, eyes flicking to an error she couldn't solve yet, fork suspended in midair until the idea landed. Mark was the pride of the family. He wore a Letterman jacket that lived on the back of a dining chair, shoulders dotted with rain from practices that stretched past sunset. Coaches waved at him from pickups. Neighbors asked about yardage and colleges. Our father leaned forward when Mark spoke, the way he leaned into a case that might be saved if everything went right. On Fridays, the whole town lit the stadium like a spaceship, and my mother cheered with a voice I didn't hear anywhere else. After the games, there were casseroles dropped off at our door, as if effort alone deserved a potluck. Kelly was my mother's favorite. This was obvious in the small, everyday ways that sting more than declarations. Pink ribbons lined up on her dresser, white sandals saved for beach, a jewelry box that sang when it opened. Mom braided Kelly's hair in the morning, fingers quick and gentle, and tucked notes into her lunchbox with hearts in the corners. "My little lady," she'd say, adjusting a bow that didn't need adjusting. Kelly learned to pose for pictures, chin turned, eyelashes down. And I was the middle child, the elastic between 2 polished shoes. At the dinner table I filled the silences with napkin folding and water refills. Teachers wrote "quiet, dependable" on report cards that felt like participation ribbons. In school photos, I'm always slightly off-center, as if the photographer couldn't quite decide whether I belonged to the left or the right. It wasn't cruelty, but it was quiet absence. Still, there were moments when the family snapped into focus, and I believed we were unbreakable. Saturday mornings, the kitchen turned into a pie factory. The radio played oldies, and Mom measured flour in a cloud that settled on our eyelashes. Dad peeled apples with a surgeon's patience, long ribbons curling into a mixing bowl. Mark chopped walnuts too loudly. Kelly perched on a stool threading ribbon through her hair and offering quality control bites. I rolled crusts with a thrift store pin and pressed the edges with a fork, leaving my small, even footprints in pastry. For 1 hour, we were 4 pairs of hands chasing sweetness across a Formica countertop. Summers were lake seasons. The beach was a stripe of sand the size of our backyard, but to us it was vacation. Dad napped in the shade with a hat over his eyes. Mom read technical manuals disguised by a paperback cover. Mark skipped stones and kept score against himself. Kelly collected shells and declared each one the prettiest. I floated on my back with my ears underwater, the world softened to thumps and faraway gulls. On those days, we weren't a hierarchy. Our house ran on predictable rhythms. Wednesday was spaghetti night, Sundays meant church and grocery circulars spread across the table. I learned to make myself useful. I set out plates, I found lost keys, I patched the knee of my own jeans. I looked for ways to be seen that didn't require anyone to turn their head. In the quiet, I listened, the clack of my mother's keys, the bounce of a football in the driveway, the train breathing past our fence. When I grew brave, I'd wedge myself into the scene, ask Dad if he wanted more salad, ask Mom if I could help debug by reading the error message out loud, ask Mark to teach me how to throw a spiral, offer Kelly my last bobby pin. Mostly life said later and moved on. The day my father lost his job, the house seemed to tilt a few degrees. He came home early, scrubs wrinkled, face a hard blink. Administrative differences, he said, dropping his badge onto the counter with a clatter that made the dog bark. Later I learned differences meant a shouting match with a new manager about unsafe scheduling. To the hospital, he was replaceable. But to us, he had been the metronome. When it stopped, everything else lost rhythm. Within a week the mailbox grew teeth. Past due notices bit into our mornings. The whiteboard on the fridge stopped listing dinners and started listing balances. Dad paced like a man counting steps to an exit he could not find. He called colleagues, sent resumes, drove to interviews in his best suit, knuckles white on the steering wheel. Each time he returned quieter, as if the road had sanded him down. At night, I heard him in the bathroom, running the tap to cover the sound of him clearing his throat, pride rearranged into silence. Mom took on extra projects and turned the living room into a glowing cave. She switched from coffee to energy drinks, from soft music to static, from sweetheart to not now. Code scrolled down her screen like rain. When we spoke, it felt like tapping on a window no one would open. She became brittle, all angles and deadlines. "We'll manage," she said without looking away from the laptop, as if assurance could be compiled like a program. Her hugs shortened until they were just a brush of sleeves. Arguments arrived with the bills. Small ones at first, about cereal brands and thermostat settings, then louder, older arguments dressed in new clothes. Dad accused the hospital of politics. Mom accused him of pride. He said she was married to her screen. She said he was married to his ego. I learned the shape of their sentences, where they would pause, how they would land. The dog hid under my bed. I learned to breathe quietly, to slip a plate into a sink without a sound. We started rationing in ways that didn't look like rationing. Hot water on a timer. Lights off by 9. Toothpaste squeezed from the very end with a bobby pin. The grocery list shrank to store brands and coupons, and then to "we'll figure it out." I picked up babysitting and folded the money into an envelope under my mattress, an act that felt both helpful and treasonous. When I offered some for the electric bill, Mom's eyes flashed. "Keep it," she snapped, and then softer, guilty, "keep it for school supplies." I did not tell her I'd already bought a used algebra textbook with a stranger's notes in the margins. Mark, who used to leave cleat prints from the back door to the fridge, stopped bringing his duffel inside at all. At first, he cut practice to babysit me and Kelly, claiming a sore ankle. Then he quit outright, dropping his jersey onto the kitchen table like a resignation letter. The coach called. Dad pressed the phone to his chest and begged him to reconsider. Mom hissed that scholarships didn't grow on trees. Mark stared at the backyard, jaw working. "I can pick up shifts at the hardware store," he said, and did. The Friday night stadium lights still blinked on, but our street felt darker. Kelly developed nightmares. She woke up crying about trains tipping over, houses sliding into the tracks, everyone inside rolling like marbles. I started sleeping on the edge of her bed, humming the radio jingles she liked, rubbing her back until the tension left her shoulders. In the mornings she carried her pink ribbons to the breakfast table like small surrender flags. Mom tied them hurriedly, knots crooked, while answering emails. Dad kissed Kelly's scalp absently and counted the pills in his hand, vitamins, antacids, something the color of the mint candies he used to keep. The house itself joined the rebellion. The faucet dripped. The furnace coughed when the weather turned. Repairs were discussed in future tense. Duct tape appeared like a new family member, useful, unglamorous, everywhere. Even the pie tins gathered dust. Flour was suddenly too expensive for traditions, and none of us had the appetite for sweetness. On Saturdays, I cleaned the kitchen as if order could be Windexed back into place. But it never quite worked. At school, I learned to translate my life into acceptable answers. How are you? Became good. Field trip permission slips were negotiated with cash I didn't want to ask for. A friend invited me to a movie. I said I had plans, then watched the ceiling for 2 hours while my parents argued softly in the next room about gas money. I kept waiting for the adults to click into their old shape. Dad's confidence thinned with each rejection, and sometimes he drank a beer in the garage and stared at the tools like they might tell him what to do. Mom's patience evaporated into a fine mist that stung when you walked through it. They apologized in fragments, rough day, I'm trying, I know, and then the fragments cut us again. One day, everything shifted from barely manageable to impossible. It was a Tuesday because Dad said the clinic closes early on Tuesdays, even though he no longer had a clinic to go to. He moved through the kitchen, taking his coffee mug, the good knives he said he paid for, the toolbox from under the sink. I watched from the doorway with a dish towel in my hands, the fabric twisting until my fingers hurt. Mark hovered behind him, cleats dangling by their laces from one hand, duffel bag bulging with jerseys and socks that still smelled like grass and liniment. Dad didn't make a speech. He just avoided my eyes and checked the hall clock. When he did speak, he used the kind of voice doctors use when they say a word like procedure. Come on, son. We're going to a new home. Mark tried to look older than he was. He didn't hug me, but his mouth twitched like he wanted to. He had on the blue windbreaker I used to borrow. I thought about asking for it back, something small, something mine. I didn't. The screen door squealed and thudded. Dad started the Jeep. Gravel spit from the tires. A few seconds later the house settled, and the only sound left was the refrigerator motor buzzing and a freight train, late and heavy, pushing the night in bright, unblinking windows. For the first time, I understood that silence can make a room feel crowded. Mom sat at her laptop until past midnight, the code on her screen turning her face a sickly aquarium blue. She kept typing even when the page was empty. When I asked where Dad and Mark were going, she said, they'll be fine, like she was talking to an error message that refused to disappear. A week slid by like a bad dream repeated. On Sunday morning, Mom pulled the suitcase down from the closet shelf and laid Kelly's dresses in it, the ones with the pink ribbons that never looked the same after they went through the wash. She packed the jewelry box that played a slow, tinny song if you wound it just right. Kelly stood very straight, chin up like she was in a school picture. We're staying with Aunt Marie for a while, Mom told her, zipping the suitcase. Just until things settle. Kelly's eyes went shiny. Why can't we all go? Mom's jaw tightened, a little click. It's what makes sense. She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't look at me when she carried the suitcase to the car either. Kelly gave me the fast kind of hug that never lands. I watched the taillights smear red in the drizzle and thought, this is how a house is emptied, not by a storm but by a schedule. After that, it was just me and the objects nobody bothered to choose. The chipped cereal bowls, the cracked garden gnome, the faded towel that used to be white. A woman came by with a badge on a lanyard and sat at our table filling out forms. She asked my birthday and whether I had any allergies, and I answered like a very good student. She took the measuring tape from her bag and wrapped it around the doorway, as if the doorway were going to be adopted, too. On the last morning, I didn't cook. I wore my nicest shirt because I thought maybe that mattered. The woman with the lanyard drove me. I sat in the back seat behind her, watching her ponytail sway with every turn. We passed the hospital where Dad used to park crooked because he said the lines were for people who didn't know what they were doing. We passed the football field, and I tried not to see the empty space where Mark would have been. The building didn't look like a home. It looked like a school built out of leftovers. Cinder block walls the color of chewed gum, metal doors with narrow windows, a patch of grass out front that had given up. Inside, the air smelled like disinfectant and old lunches. There was a bulletin board with construction paper flowers and a poster about washing your hands. A clock that ticked loudly enough to be rude. The intake lady had a clipboard and a smile that didn't move her eyes. She asked me to sign my name on 3 lines and print it on another. She wrote my height and weight, my grade, my dentist. She assigned me a number and a bunk like it was a camp where nobody ever learned the songs. I stood very still so the new facts wouldn't slip off me. My mother unexpectedly arrived too, dressed in more well-kept clothes, with red lips. She stood beside me. When I reached for her hand, she shifted her purse to that side. The intake lady explained schedules, breakfast at 7, chores by rotation, lights out at 9, as if reading me the rules for a game I hadn't agreed to play. Then came the sentence I still hear in the middle of otherwise fine days. "You'll be better off there," my mother said, without looking me in the eye. Better off where? On an iron bunk? With a number? I wanted to ask, but the words felt too expensive. Mom leaned down as if to kiss the top of my head, missed on purpose, and adjusted the collar of my shirt. "Be good," she added. The hallway to the dorm wing was long and shiny, waxed to a dull hope. Footsteps echoed. Somewhere, a TV hollered game show answers. Somewhere, someone was crying in a voice that didn't care who heard. The intake lady handed me a pillow encased in plastic that crackled when I squeezed it. We walked to the metal door. Mom didn't touch me as we went. She held her purse strap like it might run away. At the threshold, she turned to the intake lady and said, "Thank you," as if we had just eaten a meal. I remember the doors of the orphanage slamming behind her, and that was the end of my childhood. It wasn't a good home like my mom promised. Mornings began with a bell that scared you out of sleep, metal on metal, followed by the scramble for showers that never got warm. If you didn't move fast, you went to class with hair still dripping and a damp collar that chafed your neck until noon. The teachers were strict in the way of people who confused control with care. Ms. Cortez wrapped a ruler on desks when a pencil paused too long. Mr. Halpern timed bathroom breaks and wrote demerits like tally marks on a prison wall. They taught math and spelling, yes, but mostly they taught the choreography of lines. Eyes forward. Hands to yourself. No talking in the hall. In the lunchroom, we turned trays in, bottoms up, to prove we'd eaten. Powdered eggs left a film on the tongue. Milk arrived lukewarm. The kids fought for crumbs of attention the way pigeons fight for crusts, quick, loud, shameless. If a staff member remembered your name without looking at a chart, it felt like a miracle and a trap at the same time. My bunk was iron and unforgiving, the kind that kept a ledger of your turning with squeaks that told the room you were still awake. I kept my few things in a dented locker with a sticking latch, a brush with half its bristles, a photo booth strip from a carnival where I'm blurry because I laughed at the wrong moment, and a spiral notebook with a purple cover. In that notebook, I wrote letters to Mark and Kelly. Some began "Dear," and some began "Please." I told Mark about the football scores I caught on the cafeteria TV and pretended I was in the bleachers. I told Kelly about a girl who wore pink barrettes on visiting days and how the light in the dorm made everything look sick. I wrote my return address carefully and handed the envelopes to the office. None of them ever arrived, at least not back to me. The older kids taught me the rules the staff didn't announce. Don't cry where anyone can see it. Tears are a currency and prices rise by the day. Don't let your toothbrush leave your sight, not even for a minute. Sit with your back to the wall. If someone says they'll save you a seat, they'll save it for themselves. There was a pecking order built on age, size, and how hard your life had already been. I wasn't the smallest, but I had the newness that bullies smell, so I learned quickly how to tuck my chin, how to make myself broad in doorways, how to step sideways instead of back. The calendar marked holidays, but the days themselves didn't change much. On birthdays, the kitchen sent out sheet cake rectangles with a blue flower no one wanted to eat. If you asked a staff member how long you'd be there, they said, until placement, as if placement were a real town with a map you could study. Placement meant foster homes, and foster homes meant spin the bottle with your life. Some families used us for the monthly check and a compliment from their caseworker. Those houses were tidy in a way that felt like a staged photo. I did dishes with water so hot it took the fingerprints off my fingers and listened to arguments from 2 rooms away. Other homes kept us like free labor. On one farm, I woke at 5 to feed chickens that hated me and haul buckets that sloshed up my jeans and chilled my bones until noon. If I did it well, I earned seconds at dinner. If I did it poorly, I earned character. In the city, I stayed with a woman who collected foster kids like spare furniture. We were stacked in bunk beds 3 high. My job was to watch 2 toddlers while she ran errands. She showed me where she kept the TV remote and the emergency numbers she would never answer. Between placements, I returned to the orphanage. I hid my notebook under the mattress and counted my breaths until sleep took pity. I taped my letters together when I ran out of envelopes and imagined them as a bridge that could carry me to my brother and sister. At night, the dim light left shadows in the corners that looked like people who might tell me what to do. In the morning, they were mops and a coat rack. There were small kindnesses as pockets in a rough coat. A janitor who slid me an extra carton of milk without eye contact. A librarian who looked the other way when I stayed until closing and copied recipes from an old magazine as if ink on paper could taste like cinnamon. A girl named Sherry who took the top bunk without complaint because she knew I worried about falling. But mostly it was me and the long days, me and a body that needed feeding. Mrs. Hayden arrived in my life the way morning sun slips under a worn curtain, quiet, ordinary, and suddenly everything looks different. She was our elderly literature teacher with a cardigan for every day of the week and hands that shook when she wrote on the board. The other kids made jokes about her slow walk and the way she pronounced Whitman, but I noticed how she looked each of us in the eyes when she said our names. In a place where we were case files and bed numbers, that felt like someone pulling a chair out for you at a crowded table. She didn't adopt me. She never once hinted at it. Instead, she offered the 2 things the system forgot to budget for: stability and faith. "You are not your paperwork," she told me after class one day, tapping my folder as if it were a stubborn television that needed better reception. "You are a whole story." After that, she started keeping me after the bell on Thursdays. We graded quizzes, ate peanut butter crackers from the vending machine, and talked about novels I pretended I'd already read. One Saturday, she drove me to her apartment, a 2nd-floor walk-up with creaky steps and a brass doorknob that warmed in your hand. "My library," she said, sweeping her arm toward overflowing shelves. There were books everywhere, stacked on windowsills, nested on the coffee table, lined up along the hallway. She poured tea into cups that didn't match and let me pick a book to keep. I chose a collection of poems because the cover felt soft. Before I left, she pressed a brown paper bundle into my arms. Inside was a sketchbook and a set of graphite pencils. "For your hands," she said. "They're always ready to make something." I didn't know what I was supposed to make. I drew faces because faces were what I understood: tired house parents, girls from the dorm, the janitor asleep on his break, my own profile in the cheap mirror screwed to the wall. The lines were clumsy at first, then steadier. I shaded under eyes and along cheekbones, then started to imagine how light could change a person's day if you put it in the right place. Makeup found me by accident. Spring of junior year, the school announced prom, and half the girls in our dorm groaned about hair and dresses we couldn't afford. Someone produced a cracked compact and 2 drugstore lipsticks. I watched the oldest girl dab color on her mouth like it might bite. "Here," I said without thinking, and took the compact. My hands remembered the angles I drew in the sketchbook. I blended, softened, lifted. I used a thrift store eyeshadow palette the way you use a watercolor set. For the first time, a girl looked in the mirror and said, "Oh," like a door had opened. Word spread. By the week of prom, I had a line outside my bunk. I did cat eyes with a black pencil nub, used petroleum jelly as highlighter, warmed mascara between my palms so it wouldn't clump. I pinned bangs and whispered, "Breathe," when hands shook. An hour later, the hallway gleamed with girls who saw themselves brighter than before. It sounds small, but it saved me. Every good face I finished was a proof that change could happen with patience and the right touch. Mr. Halpern, who measured bathroom breaks, saw the commotion and tried to shut it down, Mrs. Hayden stepped between us, folded her shaking hands, and said, "It's an extracurricular rooted in career exploration." He had no policy for that phrase. I did makeup at Halloween, and for seniors retaking ID pictures. I started reading magazines at the library, studying undertones and skin prep like they were algebra. Mrs. Hayden kept showing up. She drove me to the drugstore and taught me to comparison shop with coupons. She made me practice handshakes before mock interviews. When my panic rose like steam, she talked me down with poetry, steady as a metronome. I am the master of my fate, not a rescue. A mirror. At 17, college felt like a word invented for other people's mouths. But Mrs. Hayden was relentless. She pinned scholarship applications to a corkboard and set timers. "Deadlines are a kindness," she would say, adjusting her glasses. She asked the guidance counselor for fee waivers and cornered the vice principal to sign a verification form. I don't know how many doors she knocked on for me. I only know that one afternoon, I opened a letter in the staff office and the room went blurry. The scholarship didn't cover everything, but it covered enough. "You did this," I said into the phone. She exhaled, a laugh caught in it. "You did." I aged out at 18 with one duffel bag, a folder of documents, and a bus pass. No balloons. Just a signature on a form and a metal door clicking behind me. I moved into a dorm room with cinderblock walls and a window that faced the dining hall dumpsters. It still felt like a palace. The first night, I slept 12 hours and woke up without a bell. In the mornings, I attended classes where professors knew my name by the second week. In the afternoons, I wore a McDonald's visor and learned the choreography of a different line. "Welcome in, number 47, enjoy your meal." Grease lived under my nails no matter how hard I scrubbed, but the paychecks arrived every other Friday, crisp as the fries at 11 a.m. I practiced blending on my own arm between shifts. On weekends, I took the bus to the drugstore and built a kit one coupon at a time: sponges, a real set of brushes, foundation shades I could custom mix. A girl down the hall asked me to do her makeup for a photography class. Then her roommate. Then a bride in a borrowed dress who slipped me $60 and leftover cake. I watched tutorial videos late at night with headphones, pausing to take notes like it was chemistry. But my pain didn't vanish. The past taught me timing and triage. The orphanage taught me to make a line and survive it. Step by step, shift by shift, class by class, I was turning what hurt into something that could hold me. And by the age of 30, I had created something that once seemed impossible. My beauty salon in San Francisco wasn't huge, but it was mine, every square inch of it. I still remember the day I signed the lease, standing in the middle of that empty space with its cracked linoleum floors and flickering fluorescent lights. Most people would have seen a rundown storefront, but I saw mirrors, chairs, laughter, and transformation. I saw women walking in heavy with the weight of their lives and leaving a little lighter, a little stronger. The early years were brutal. I worked 16-hour days, splitting time between applying color, sweeping hair, managing invoices, and scrubbing toilets at closing. But slowly, the place began to take shape. I painted the walls a soft blush, installed warm lighting, and hung photographs of everyday women, customers, friends, neighbors, who reminded me that beauty didn't belong only to the rich or the perfect. Word of mouth became my lifeline. First came the single moms who wanted a new look before a date, then the office workers preparing for promotions, then brides who put their trust in me for the biggest day of their lives. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. The salon had 2 employees, then 4, then 6. I had a waiting list on Saturdays and standing appointments for clients who felt more like family than customers. I invested in better chairs, professional-grade equipment, and a big illuminated sign outside that made me smile every time I locked up at night. The day I bought my apartment was the day I finally let myself exhale. It wasn't fancy, a 2-bedroom on the edge of the Mission District with squeaky hardwood floors and a view of an alley. No foster system, no caseworker, no one who could take the keys from my hand. I filled it with plants, books, and framed photographs from the few good memories I had. In the kitchen, I hung a corkboard covered in notes from clients, thank you cards, and silly doodles from kids whose moms came to me before school picture day. My living room wasn't big, but it had space for friends to sprawl on the couch with pizza boxes and wine glasses, laughing until 2 in the morning. That circle of friends became my real family. There was Jenna, my first loyal client who later became my closest confidant. Marco, a hairstylist I met at a training seminar, who treated me like a sister and whose loud laugh could fill the entire salon. And Tasha, my neighbor, who knocked on my door with a plate of cookies the day I moved in and never stopped showing up whenever I needed her. None of them cared about my past. No one called me foster girl. No one saw me as broken or less. With them, I wasn't the child left behind in a shelter. I was just Rebecca. We built our own traditions: Sunday brunch at a cheap diner with bottomless coffee, birthdays celebrated with homemade cakes instead of expensive gifts, movie marathons on rainy nights. When the holidays came, and my calendar filled with clients rushing in for last-minute hair appointments, my friends decorated my apartment with dollar store garlands and mismatched ornaments. "This is our family Christmas," Jenna said one year, handing me a mug of cocoa. And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. Business wasn't without its challenges. Rent hikes, unreliable suppliers, the occasional angry customer who thought highlights were magic instead of chemistry. But every setback reminded me of how far I had come. I had weathered worse storms. Bills and angry clients didn't scare me. Abandonment had already taught me resilience, and the salon became my proof that pain could be turned into something beautiful. There were moments when I caught myself comparing my life to the glossy versions people shared online: big houses, picture-perfect families, luxury vacations. But then I would walk into my salon on a Monday morning, smell the faint trace of hair dye and coffee, see the light glinting off the mirrors, and feel the hum of life around me. That was enough. More than enough. It arrived on a Tuesday, the quiet kind of Tuesday that usually disappears between laundry and appointment reminders. A cream envelope waited under my salon door when I unlocked it at dawn, pushed in by the mailman who knew I came in early. No return address. My name written in blocky letters that stopped my breath because they were familiar in a way I hadn't felt in years. Mark's careful, square handwriting, the one he used on football playbooks. I stood in the reception area with the light still off and ran my thumb under the flap. "Rebecca, Dad is sick. Mom wants to get us all together. Come over." That was it. No hello. No I'm sorry. No mention of the decades collapsed into a single line. I read the sentence 3 times. My first reaction was a noise I didn't recognize, halfway between a laugh and a cough. Then I felt the floor tilt like it had all those years ago when the Jeep pulled away and nobody looked back. I slipped the letter into my apron pocket and told myself I would pretend it was junk mail until I finished my first client. But memory is a bad employee. It doesn't wait for business hours. Every mirror I passed returned not only my face, but a 9-year-old's. My hands did their work: section, clip, comb, snip, while my mind replayed Mark's silent mouth at the door the day Dad took him, the blue windbreaker I never got back, the Ferris wheel of birthdays no one called for. By lunch, the letter felt hot against my hip. A week later, the phone rang while I was closing out the register. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, the way I do when a vendor calls to upsell blow dryers. Curiosity won by a hair. "Rebecca," a thin voice asked, and I heard the tremble before the name. "It's Kelly." She was crying. Not dramatic tears, not the kind that ask for attention. The quiet kind, like leaks under a sink you don't notice until the floor warps. "All this time," she said, breath hitching, "I thought you were living with Grandma. They told me it would be better that way." The word "they" hurt more than I expected. For a second, I saw our kitchen, the braid Mom used to pull too tight and then pat like an apology. I swallowed. "Who told you that?" "Mom," she said, a whisper now. "And Dad?" "When I asked where you were, they said with Grandma. They said you were happy. I only found out last month about the shelter. I didn't know." Her sob turned into a small cough. "I'm sorry, Becca." "I'm so sorry." The rack of retail shampoos blurred. Somewhere outside, a bus sighed. I pressed the phone between my ear and shoulder and wiped the counter just to keep my hands moving. "You were a child, Kelly," I said, surprised that my voice sounded steady. "You asked what kids ask. They told you what they wanted." She sniffed. "I wanted to find you then." Dad said no. He said you were better off." She let the words sit between us like scissors on a tray. "He's sick now. Mark wrote to you, right? Mom wants us all to meet. She says it's time." Time. The word folded around me like an old sweater I didn't want to put back on. "Where?" I asked, even though I already hated myself for asking. "At a country house," she said. "A rental outside the city. They're calling it a family reunion." I could hear her wince at the phrase. "Can you come? Will you? Could you at least think about it?" I told her I would think about it. I said it like a person agreeing to try a new moisturizer. Calm, distant, polite. After we hung up, I locked the salon and sat in the dark at the front desk with the neon open sign, still glowing against the window like a dare. The invitation arrived 2 days later. Reunion weekend, it read, in gold script. The address of the country house, check-in times, a request to RSVP. On the back, under the schedule, Friday dinner, Saturday hike, Sunday brunch, someone had handwritten, "Let's make amends. Your mom." The words didn't land, they skittered. I brought the invitation home and put it on my kitchen table beside a weeks-old magazine and a little succulent that refused to die. It looked ridiculous there, like a costume jewelry ring set among simple ceramic plates. That night, I texted Jenna a picture of the card. She called instead of replying. "You okay?" she asked without hello. "I got promoted to blood relative," I said. "Benefits include an unpaid weekend and the opportunity to forgive on schedule." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you want to go?" Want is a tricky word. Want implies choice without gravity. "I want to not be the girl they left," I said. "But I also don't want to perform for people who would prefer a lie that absolves them." "Then don't perform," she said. "If you go, go as the woman who owns a salon and a life. If you don't go, you still get to be that woman." After we hung up, I lay on my couch and tried to picture the country house. I imagined a long table, mason jars with tea lights, my mother arranging napkins like peace treaties, my father sitting smaller than the last time I saw him. I tried to summon anger, a clean burn I could hold like a torch. What came instead was something messier, a collage of Kelly's thin voice, Mark's square handwriting, my own face in a mirror the day I turned 9 and stopped looking like a child. In the morning, I went to work and did what I know how to do, I listened. I made women feel seen. Between clients, my phone stayed face down, the letter in my apron pocket like a pebble I wouldn't discard and couldn't quite hold. And I agreed to meet, but only on my terms. I chose a restaurant in the city center with white tablecloths and a window view of the cable cars. No country house, no framed family photos, no familiar hallways to tilt the story back in their favor. I made the reservation under my own name and arrived early enough to breathe through the nerves and decide where I would sit, back to the wall, sight lines clear, the judge's bench I built for myself out of a banquette, and a small candle that smelled like vanilla. They arrived in a careful formation, my mother first, clutching her purse with both hands, my father behind her, thinner than I remembered, but carrying the same practiced authority, Mark with his jaw set, Kelly with eyes already glassy. The hostess led them to me as if she were delivering a verdict. "Rebecca," my mother said, folding me into a hug that met only fabric. "You look, well." She meant successful. I let the sentence dangle and motioned to the empty chairs. A waiter poured water. I kept my coat on. My father watched me like a problem set he hadn't studied for. His eyes slid over the salon owner polish I'd put on, subtle makeup, clean lines, nothing to apologize for, and returned to the face he last really saw when I was 9. He asked about parking, the universal small talk of men who have lost the map. The menus arrived, an elegant distraction, and we pretended to read them. "So," I said, closing mine. "You wanted to meet." He cleared his throat. He stopped, recalculated. "I heard about your business." "The salon." He said salon as if it might be a charity. "Your sister showed me the website." "Congratulations," my mother rushed, relief in her voice like steam escaping a kettle. Your photos are beautiful. You always had good hands. I thought of all the nights my hands cleaned a microwave at McDonald's, of all the faces they had learned to study and soften. I took a sip of water. Thank you. The waiter reappeared. We ordered without appetite. The candle between us hissed, a small wick with too much work to do. Dad leaned forward, elbows careful not to crease the tablecloth. We were so stupid, he said, like a man discovering gravity too late. We should have taken you too. No, I said, and felt the words settle like a gavel. You didn't forget me. You chose. The table went perfectly still. Silverware paused midair. A woman at the next table laughed at something her date said, and the sound felt obscene. My father's mouth opened, closed. His hands found each other and interlaced the way surgeons hold their own fingers when there is nothing left to fix. My mother's eyes filled quickly, the way a glass fills from the bottom. I didn't know what I was doing then, she whispered. I didn't know. She repeated it like a password that used to open a door. Mark and Kelly were silent. Mark studied the salt shaker as if waiting for a coach's whistle. Kelly's fingers shook under the table. I knew because I saw the ripples in her water. You knew enough to keep my brother, I said, turning to my father. You knew enough to take my sister someplace safe. I let the next words land without raising my voice. You knew enough to drive me to a building with a metal door. We thought, my father began, stopped, started again. I thought the system could. Raise me? I asked. Feed me? Teach me how to sleep with my shoes on just in case? It did. But not because you planned it. Because I learned. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, already shredding the edge unconsciously. I was exhausted. I was working nights. I was scared. I kept telling myself it was temporary. Temporary became years, I stated. The appetizers arrived and sat there cooling like unclaimed packages. The candle sputtered and steadied. I let the silence stretch, not to be cruel, but because the truth required oxygen. I wrote to you, I said to Mark without looking away from my parents. Letters, year after year. Did you get any of them? His mouth tightened. No, he said, hoarse. I didn't. I tried to find you when I turned 18. Dad said you were with a family and happy. He said it would only confuse things. I turned to Kelly. And you? She swallowed. I asked a lot about you when I was little. But they said stop bringing it up. My mother's tears hardened into a different shape. I didn't know what I was doing then, she said again, as if this time the words might arrange themselves into absolution. You keep saying that, I answered, evenly. But decisions don't disappear because you rename them. You made a choice, and then you made a story about that choice. And I lived in the space between. My father's eyes flashed, a brief rebellion against his own apology. You think I haven't suffered? He asked, voice low. You think I haven't replayed that day? I lost my job, my standing, You lost your standing, I said. Well, I lost my childhood. He leaned back, the chair protesting softly. The candle flickered. I don't have to be your daughter again, I stated, and the word daughter felt less like a title than a costume I'd outgrown. I already have a family, the ones who never abandoned me. My voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. My mother made a small sound, Rebecca, she tried, but the rest failed to arrive. Mark stared down at his hands. Kelly's eyes pleaded without sentences, and I had to look away because I still loved the girl with pink ribbons who once held my hand on the way across the street. I'm not here to humiliate you, I continued. I'm here to set the record. I built a life without you because I had to. I did not need a reunion to be whole. The food was untouched. The waiter approached, read the air, and veered away. Kelly finally spoke, voice small and steady. I called because I wanted us to try, she said. Not to erase anything. Just try. Her eyes found mine. If it's not possible, say so. But say it to me, not to the past. I studied her, the woman she'd become under a story I didn't get to see. Trying, I said, means telling the truth aloud and surviving the sound. I turned to my parents. So tell me the truth, not the version you tell yourself at night. My mother stared at the tablecloth. When she looked up, the performance had drained out of her face. I was drowning, she said. I was ashamed of the drowning. Your father said the orphanage would be safer than our house while we figured things out. I wanted to believe him because the alternative was admitting that I had failed you. And when you didn't come back? I asked. I told myself you were better off than with two broken parents, she said. I could not bear the ledger of days, so I stopped counting. I'm sorry. She shook her head. Those words feel cheap. But I am. I waited until my heart slowed. Thank you for saying it without excuses, I said. It doesn't fix anything. But it is honest. My father stared at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. I wanted order, he said finally. I made a decision the way I made calls in the operating room, fast, final, and then I defended it long after it deserved defending. He looked up, and for the first time that night I saw something unguarded. I was wrong. The candle guttered and recovered. Outside, a cable car clanged. The restaurant hummed around us, the living world indifferent to our long-delayed trial. I feel like a judge, I admitted, and all three of them looked at me. But I don't have a sentence to hand down. I placed my palms on the table as if to study the ledger. This is my record. You left me. You told yourselves stories about why. But I lived anyway. Mark exhaled, something like relief and grief braided together. What do you need from us now? He asked. If anything. I thought about the girl who slept with her shoes on, the young woman who learned where the exits were, the business owner who chose her own doors. I need you to stop asking me to comfort you about what you did to me, I said. And I need you to stop rewriting the past. My mother nodded, a small motion that cost her something. My father closed his eyes for a long second, then opened them and kept them open. The check arrived. I reached for it and set my card down. My choice, my terms. When the waiter left, I looked at each of them. You asked for this meeting, I said. You got it. I stood, sliding into my coat. If there is anything after this, it will happen where I am respected, not summoned. Kelly rose, then stopped herself, hands flat on the linen. Text me, she whispered. Even if it's just one line. Mark nodded once, solemn as a vow. I'll wait, he said. My mother started to reach for me and then dropped her hand. Rebecca, I seriously didn't know what I was doing then, she repeated softly, but this time she didn't offer it as a defense. I stepped away from the table. The candle flared, then steadied, then leaned in the small wind my leaving made. Outside, the city was loud and alive, and I let the noise carry me down the steps and onto the sidewalk, where the air felt honest and the night belonged to people who chose one another on purpose. Ahead of me, the lanes opened into the kind of ordinary that saves you. Stoplights, crosswalks, a corner market with its fruit stacked like little suns. I drove through it all, steady, choosing again and again the life that had chosen me back. A real family is not defined by bloodlines, surnames, or the people who brought you into this world. A real family is built out of loyalty, out of presence, out of those who stay when it's easier to walk away. I did not choose to be abandoned at 9 years old, but I chose what came after. I chose to work my way through school. I chose to build a business from nothing when the odds were stacked against me. And I chose my people, my friends, my colleagues, the community I created, those who became my true family. Yes, I forgave my parents quietly, if only because I no longer wanted to carry their weight inside me. But forgiveness does not erase history. It does not allow them to rewrite the past as if it were all a misunderstanding, a small error in judgment. No, they made their choice deliberately. They took my brother, they took my sister, and they left me behind. And that decision defined my childhood. Now, after decades, they want to pretend we can gather around a table, hold hands, and say we are whole again. But that child they abandoned no longer exists. I am not here to soothe their guilt or play the role of the lost daughter miraculously returned. I have built myself piece by piece, scar by scar, and I am not theirs to reclaim. Still, I do not live with bitterness. Bitterness would mean they still had power over me. Instead, I live with clarity. I walked away from that dinner knowing that my life no longer intersected with theirs in any meaningful way. They would continue to tell themselves whatever lies they needed to in order to sleep at night. But I carried only one truth with me. I was never unwanted. I was simply misplaced until I found where I truly belonged. If you are watching this now, maybe you know that feeling too. Maybe you have been made to feel unwanted in your own family, pushed aside, ignored, or even abandoned. You are stronger than you know, and you can build a life that no one can take away from you. Have you ever been made to feel unwanted in your own family? I want you to share your own story in the comments below, I promise. Your voice really matters here. And if my story resonates with you, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel, because it's proof that we are building a community where no one has to feel invisible, forgotten, or unloved ever again.